Amazing discovery. Silent Billionaire's daughter revealed hidden voice with Black Maid's touching support. Anne Baxter stood silently on the ornate marble staircase of her family's mansion, the echo of laughter and clinking glasses resonating through the gilded halls. She felt like a ghost in her own home, drifting through a lavish party that suffocated her with its demands. Designers had draped her in flawless fabrics, but inside she was fraying at the seams. Just months after her father's death, expectation wrapped itself around her like the heavy velvet curtains drawn tight against the world outside. The whispers followed her like shadows. What will she do with the fortune? Can she live up to her father's legacy? They twisted the knife deeper every time she thought of the arts foundation that she was now the steward of, a gift meant to empower the community, yet it felt like a chain. Their mutterings threatened to drown her resolve, inching her closer to the edge where every decision loomed dauntingly. Mabel, her family's devoted maid, wandered into the kitchen while Anne stood lost in thought, the scent of spices swirling around her. Mabel, with her knowing smile and wise eyes, was one of the few who understood the weight of Anne's inheritance. "You gotta let it out, honey," she encouraged, her hands busy preparing the evening's feast. "You've got that voice and it needs a chance." It was true. When Anne sang, the echoes transformed the cramped corners of the mansion into a magical realm. But could she muster the courage to share that gift with the world? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can, leave a like. It really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now, let's continue. Yet, every time she imagined stepping onto the stage, a knot tightened in her stomach. She felt an overwhelming tide of guilt wash over her. Could she ever reveal herself as an artist amid the legacy of a billionaire? The dichotomy gnawed at her. With each stolen moment of doubt, the townsfolk's critiques crept closer, drilling holes into the fragile sense of self she had started to piece together. News spread throughout Maplewood about her father's will and the arts foundation he had established, igniting a firestorm of speculation. How could someone like her, born with a silver spoon in her mouth, possibly understand the struggles of their lives? As she mused over these thoughts, the pressure mounted. Would they see her as nothing more than a spoiled heiress, using the foundation as a shaky stepping stone for her vanity project? Each breath felt labored as the impending local singing competition crept closer, and she wrestled with the decision to enter. It was her chance to carve her own path, to break free from the shackles of her family's expectations. Yet it felt like a betrayal of everything she had known. The flood of uncertainty was suffocating, as if her very essence was at war. Just then, whispers of a troubling revelation about her father began to swirl around in the echoes of her thoughts, a hint that what she understood about her family's history might be a facade. It clawed at her, sending her spiraling into a chasm of doubt. Would she allow it to snuff out her voice, or would she fight against the tide of her lineage to claim her own identity? Standing on the precipice of her own fears, the decision loomed. Tonight, as the lights dimmed and the crowd's anticipation crackled, would she rise to embrace the artist within, or be dragged back into the cold silence of her family's legacy? The moment stretched, heavy with the weight of unspoken truths, as Anne Baxter prepared to step into the spotlight that might illuminate her path or consume her whole. The anticipation in the air thickened as Anne stood at the back of the stage, her heart racing in time with the distant drum of the crowd. Each whoop, cheer, and clap felt like a distinct challenge, a reminder of the persona she was expected to embody: strong, confident, capable. Yet reality loomed starkly. She felt like an imposter at that very moment. Mabel's words echoed in her mind. You've got that voice, and it needs a chance. Could she reconcile the image of the daughter of a billionaire with the artist she yearned to be? A cacophony of memories surged to the forefront of her mind. Childhood moments spent singing into a hairbrush in her bedroom and rehearsing in front of the full-length mirror. They had been innocent and free before the weight of her father's fortune anchored her spirit. What had felt like joyous expression now threatened to become an exhibition of her inadequacies. As she peered into the audience, she caught the gaze of familiar faces, old family friends, acquaintances, even strangers from the town. Would they see the raw talent she had hidden, or simply the baggage of her lineage? The thought was suffocating, and the knot in her stomach tightened further. Yet, somewhere beneath the uncertainty, a flicker of determination began to stir. With a sigh, Anne made her way to the front of the stage as the spotlight dimmed ever so slightly, drawing all eyes upon her. As the host announced her name, the sound reverberated in her mind, echoing deep-seated fears mingled with thrilling possibility. She took a deep breath. This moment was hers to seize, and perhaps, just perhaps, it could pass as a declaration of her identity, an opportunity to silence the whispers that had tormented her. It was more than just about her voice. It was about claiming who she was, not just who her father had shaped her to be. As the first notes of the song burst forth, she surrendered to the music. Each word she sang enveloped her in a shroud of vulnerability, cutting through the weight of expectations. Her voice flowed with newfound sincerity, an infusion of life that had been dormant for too long. The words transformed from mere sounds to declarations, not just of melody, but of her very essence. As she descended into the chorus, the barrier she had erected began to crumble. For the first time in months, the pressure evaporated. It was just her and the music. The audience seemed to fade into the background. This was a gift from her father, a chance to bring light to the dark corners of her heart rather than it becoming another burden to carry. A sense of clarity washed over her as she surrendered self-doubt for authenticity, a thrilling realization that each note resonated as her own. But as she descended into the chorus, the barrier she had erected began to crumble. For the first time in months, the pressure evaporated. It was just her and the music. The audience seemed to fade into the background. This was a gift from her father, a chance to bring light to the dark corners of her heart rather than it becoming another burden to carry. A sense of clarity washed over her as she surrendered self-doubt for authenticity, a thrilling realization that each note resonated as her own. But as she finished and the crowd erupted in applause, a discordant thought intruded, a searing realization of the truths lurking just beyond her grasp. Today she had been brave, but who would she truly be once the applause faded? Were the shadows of her family's legacy destined to linger, or was this the first step toward carving her own narrative? Doubt mingled with exhilaration in those tense seconds, but one thing was certain. She had discovered a voice that was uniquely hers, one that could reshape everything she thought she knew. Would it survive confrontations with her past, and could she harness that voice to navigate the rocky terrain of her inheritance? The moments of truth were just beginning as she stepped off the stage, the applause still ringing in her ears, but the air thickening with the weight of the questions that had yet to be answered. How would her journey unfold now that she had awakened her voice? The moment Anne stepped off the stage, the applause dwindling into a distant echo, she was immediately enveloped by a wave of uncertainty. The energy of performance still coursed through her veins, yet it contrasted sharply with the growing trepidation about the path ahead. Each step felt heavier, as though the weight of her father's expectations pressed down on her shoulders, entwining themselves with the exhilaration of her moment of triumph. In the dim light of the backstage area, Mabel was waiting, her expression a mixture of pride and a twinkling challenge. "You did it, Anne! That was incredible!" she exclaimed.
Yet her eyes narrowed slightly, as if assessing the aftermath of Anne's newfound courage. Anne's heart raced, not just from the performance, but from the realization that her breakthrough meant facing something far greater than the stage. "Thank you, Mabel," Anne replied, her voice undercut by gravity. Doubt crept in, chipping away at the joy of her performance. What's next? What if they don't see me as an...
What if I can't keep this up? Mabel took a step closer, her demeanor shifting towards something more earnest. You just fresh painted your stage self. The question is, how will you define yourself now that the colors are out there? Are you ready to embrace that artist inside? The intensity of Mabel's question struck hard. It echoed in the halls of Anne's mind like a haunting refrain. Could she truly be more than the expectations others placed upon her? The legacy began to feel both a weight and a gift, yet she was conflicted about how to balance the two. Anne found a quiet corner, away from the others, and allowed herself to reflect. She could still hear her heart thudding, not from the thrill of performing, but from the stark realization that she would need to confront her family's legacy. It wasn't enough simply to sing. She had to declare herself against the backdrop of her father's shadow. She remembered Mabel's words from earlier in the week during their practice sessions. You don't have to carry your father's narrative. Make your own story. Those words resonated within her, illuminating paths she had feared wouldn't hold her weight. Deciding she needed to confront her past head-on, she reached for her phone and opened a messaging app, finding her father's number there. As her fingers hovered over the screen, uncertainty gripped her. How would she communicate her desire to carve her own identity? The thought of disappointing him stirred her anxiety. Anne hesitated, the words swarming in her head. It felt impossible to articulate a lifetime of pain and expectations in a mere text. Instead, she set the phone down, making a mental note to call him. Voice to voice, it felt more authentic, a chance to reclaim her narrative right there in the conversation. As the applause rings faded, a step towards reclaiming her identity brewed a sense of newfound purpose. She would tell her father that she wasn't afraid of the family name anymore. She intended to honor it by being true to herself. But first, she needed to solidify what that truth looked like. A determination bloomed within her, driving her back toward the stage area. She sought out Mabel once more. "Can we try something new? I want to write a song, one that embodies all of this, one that expresses who I am beyond who I've been told to be." Mabel's face lit up, equal parts surprise and admiration. "Absolutely, let's get to work." As they began tossing ideas around, words began to flow, and the more they created, the lighter Anne felt. Yet as the excitement settled, a piercing question snaked its way back into her thoughts. Would her voice resonate beyond the confines of the stage and her family's expectations? Could she truly reflect her craftsmanship, her desires, in a world that was already eager to label her as merely the billionaire's daughter? The hour late turned into a flurry of spinning thoughts and ideals, but amid that whirlwind, Anne understood that the journey of self-discovery had just begun. There was much work ahead, and as the light from the rehearsal studio faded, she recognized how intricately her family's narrative intertwined with her own. The time was coming, and soon the quiet of her newfound artistic voice would have to face the roar of familial expectations. With a surge of resolve propelling her forward, the next steps loomed larger than ever on her horizon. What would these truths reveal, and how would she navigate them in the coming exploration of her dual identity? Anne woke the following day, the sunrise cutting through her window and illuminating her mind with a hazy clarity. The echoes of applause still rang lightly, but beneath them lay a pulsating rhythm of uncertainty. Today, she wasn't just another girl with dreams. Today was about making those dreams tethered to her own identity. Mabel's words from the night before echoed persistently, "Make your own story." How exactly would she take that advice and translate it into something tangible? She sat up, resolving to write down everything that defined her beyond the glare of her family's name. Pages flew by as she poured her thoughts into a notebook, creating a collage of aspirations, fears, and potential songs. Each line felt like a stepping stone towards an unknown destination, building a narrative uniquely hers. The lyrics started to form, a melody of resilience and longing wrapped around words of empowerment. Each word was an act of rebellion against the preordained script written by her lineage. Day turned into a flurry of collaboration between her and Mabel. In those hours, Anne began to appreciate the process of building something from nothing. Together, they stumbled, restructured, and ultimately discovered layers of talent previously buried under layers of expectation. It wasn't just about fitting a mold. It was about uncovering her innate abilities and embracing them unapologetically. Yet, as the days moved on, the reality of her father's looming presence threatened to darken her progress. Every shared laugh was undercut by an anxiety sneaking through her thoughts. Would he ever accept her newfound voice? Would he understand that her journey wasn't betrayal, but an evolution? Mabel sensed her internal battle and deliberately challenged Anne to confront the one person she was most afraid of, her father. "This song," Mabel urged one afternoon, "is a declaration. But you need to perform it for him, Anne. You can't hide behind your work forever." The thought alone made Anne's stomach churn. She had developed a strong relationship with her art, but the act of sharing it intimately with her father felt akin to stripping her naked before judgmental eyes. Anne realized that true freedom meant breaking through this particular fear. Gradually, the song began to take shape, a raw, heartfelt piece that drew from her struggles, her desire for independence, and her fear of familial rejection. But it still begged the question, would this song be enough to convey the depth of her? Could 3 minutes of melody articulate years of conflict and yearning? The day arrived for their live rehearsal in front of an audience comprised of family friends, colleagues, and, most importantly, her father. The stage appeared larger than it ever had, and the prospect of sharing her song sent her heart racing. She clutched the microphone tightly as she glimpsed her father's scrutinizing gaze. Sweat trickled down her back, but she would not allow doubt to seize her. As the opening chord struck, her lips moved with a passion born from weeks of creation. The words swirled around the audience, spilling out her experiences, fears, and hopes. But as she sung, a creeping sensation gnawed at her. What if her father's expression morphed into disappointment? What if he saw not the artist, but his little girl veering from the script he had so carefully crafted for her? The final note hung in the air, and for one agonizing moment the world seemed to freeze. The applause erupted, yet Anne could barely process it over the thundering of her heart. The question loomed in her mind like a storm cloud. Would he embrace the daughter behind the performance, or retreat behind the walls of expectation? She glanced towards him, an impassive figure beneath the harsh lights. With the echoes of her song still reverberating in the room, she awaited his response. Could he finally see her, not as the billionaire's daughter, but as the artist she was becoming? The moment of truth felt both intimate and infinitely beyond her grasp. And as she stood there, caught in the tension of vulnerability and hope, she realized one undeniable truth. She was ready to uncover what it truly meant to be Anne, beyond what anyone else wanted her to be. Anne's heart pounded in her chest as the applause washed over her like a wave, but it was her father's gaze that grounded her. With the air thick with expectation, she felt the weight of the moment smother her senses. She had just bared her soul, unraveling years of confinement into a singular moment of audacity. Yet here she stood, teetering on the precipice of anxiety. The fleeting high of her performance began to fade, as her father remained silent, his expression unreadable.
Had she reached him? Or had she merely inflicted another blow with her choice to step into her own light? The existential dread formed a tight knot in her stomach, making each second feel like a torturous hour. Why couldn't she read him? Wasn't he supposed to be her champion? Or had she just confirmed his worst fears? Anne. Mabel's voice broke through her reverie, grounding her somewhat as she approached, eyes sparkling with pride. "That was phenomenal! You took the stage and owned it!" But Anne barely registered Mabel's praise. Instead, she was still trapped in the paralysis of her father's silence. "Did you see him?" Anne whispered fiercely, clutching Mabel's arm. "I was expecting something, anything." Mabel's eyes softened, empathy carving her features. "You did what you needed to do. The rest isn't in your hands anymore." Deep down, Anne understood Mabel's wisdom. This artistic evolution was not just about her song, it was also about redefining her narrative. But the gnawing uncertainty persisted. She had opened her heart, stripped down her fears, and yet the foundation of her family relations still felt unyielding, like an ancient fortress refusing to crumble. Soon after, her father approached, his footsteps echoing ominously off the wooden floor. With each step, Anne's heartbeat quickened, an involuntary metronome anticipating confrontation. His close-cropped features wore a frown layered with complexity. "Dad," she began, her voice shaky but determined, "that was my heart up there." He paused, studying her as if weighing his next sentence on a fragile scale. "It was bold," he finally said, the neutral tone masking a myriad of emotions. "But you know that music is hardly a path well suited for our family." The air sizzled with tension, and Anne could feel the threads of her identity straining against the weight of his words. "I've never wanted to be just another part of our family brand. I'm not asking for approval, I'm asking for understanding. This is who I am." But her words fell flat. Had she expected him to recognize her journey immediately? Anne felt her quest for validation collide with his entrenched mentality like two opposing forces, both not yielding. Before she retreated into despair, the discontent brewing within ignited a flicker of resolve. "If you cannot accept my voice, then I will find a way to make it heard regardless," she declared, each word igniting a spark of defiance she had buried deep. For a moment his gaze held hers, and she hoped for a glimpse of acknowledgement. But beneath the surface, their familial battle raged on. The silence stretched painfully between them until he finally turned, retreating back into the sea of applauding faces. With his departure, her heart clenched in an unfamiliar combination of fury and liberation. She had confronted the embodiment of her fears, stripped her reality bare before him, and though the response felt like a slap, she embraced the anger bubbling inside. "Anne?" Mabel's voice cut through the chaotic thoughts in her mind. "You stood your ground. You're stronger than you realize." And maybe Mabel was right. With every performance, every word she wrote, she was reconstructing herself. But as she stared at the fading applause, a question loomed larger than her defiance. Would she continue to rise, or would her father's disappointment tether her ambitions? A new resolve gathered within her. If redefining her identity meant venturing further into the unknown, so be it. She would gather stories from others, share their voices, confront her family's legacy, and ensure her voice was not just heard, but celebrated. As the echoes of applause lingered, she turned towards the lights, determination flickering in her eyes. The atmosphere hummed with possibility as she stepped confidently into her future. The next door was waiting to be opened. But this time, Anne felt ready to kick it down and step through uninvited. What lay beyond, she couldn't be sure, but one thing was clear. She was no longer just the daughter of a billionaire. She was Anne, an artist forging her path, and she wouldn't look back.
But as she turned away from the lights, a chilling thought passed through her mind. Would her father respond to this boldness, or would she have to face him again, armed with more than just music? The night merged into a cacophony of bustling conversations and fading melodies as the crowd began to disperse. Anne stood apart, a small island amid the swelling tide of humanity. Each person passed without noting her resolve, and yet the stakes had transformed in that single performance. Mabel stayed close, offering bright encouragement, while Anne's internal landscape shifted under the weight of her father's silence. "What now?" Mabel asked, tilting her head slightly, her eyes sparkling with a mix of curiosity and pride. Anne had often turned to Mabel for insight, and in her most vulnerable moments, the trust between them felt like a lifeline. "I need to make something of this," she replied, her voice steadying with each word. "It's time to create something that truly reflects who I am, something that can't be dismissed." Mabel beamed, understanding the undertones of Anne's commitment. "You're going to write?" "Yes, but not just songs. I want to capture stories, stories of those who never get the spotlight, voices that deserve to be echoed." The idea slipped out, bold and unguarded. The rush of inspiration felt intoxicating. There were countless narratives within her community waiting to be told. She thought of the complexities, the struggles, the moments of joy hidden beneath the surface of everyday life. The pain of being the silenced girl behind gilded walls. However, fear mulled in the background. What would her father think of these new ambitions? Would he see her intentions as reckless or merely a misguided escape from their family expectations? His recent dismissal clashed violently with the fervor of her burgeoning independence. She needed to unravel this. "Let's start with who you know," Mabel suggested, unwavering in her support. "You could invite them to share their stories. You might be surprised at the connections you can create." The notion ignited something in Anne. Engaging with others, listening to their experiences, would not only enrich her art, but broaden her perspective. The weight of her father's words had pushed her toward a new creative path, and she felt eager to step up to the challenge. That night, wrapped in her thoughts, Anne returned home, determination replacing the lingering agony from her father's gaze. She sat at her piano, fingers hovering over the keys, but she felt a surge of rebellion stewing within her. If she were going to write, she would infuse it with the essence of her true self and those around her. It wouldn't just be art, it would be a manifesto. As the notes filled the air, she began to compose not just melodies, but an anthem to the defiance she was cultivating. Music flowed with a newfound richness that resonated with every character she envisioned adding to her tapestry. Their tales would weave into her own, an integral part of her burgeoning identity. Days slipped by in a blur of creativity. Anne invited friends to her home, hosting intimate gatherings where stories spilled into the air like precious secrets. Each voice, each recounting of struggles and triumphs etched new colors into her narrative. With every exchange, she felt chains of expectation loosening. But while her artistic horizon expanded, familial tension loomed. Anne's father remained an unresolved shadow, lurking at the edges of her consciousness, waiting for the opportune moment to strike again. Would he dismiss her work as frivolity, or would he confront her choices head-on? There was a dark cloud in this newfound light, and uncertainty nipped at her heels like a persistent ghost. The night of her next performance crept closer, anticipation and anxiety swirling within her. Anne planned to unveil a piece inspired by the stories she had gathered, a blend of self and community, and she longed for acceptance to solidify this new identity through an artistic lens. Yet questions coiled in her mind, deep-rooted anxieties persisted. Would this new voice lead to further isolation from her father, or perhaps bridge an unspoken gap? As she stood on the precipice of revealing her multifaceted self,
The stakes felt higher than ever. There was a moment of clarity as dawn broke, light infusing her thoughts. She had two paths, yet they fused into one undeniable truth. She would forge ahead into the unknown, come what may. But as she penned her final notes in her notebook, the door creaked open. Anne turned, feeling the electric tension of her father's presence. Just as she was ready to face him, the door swung widely, revealing not just him, but a flood of memories and expectations cascading around her like a thunderous storm. Would this encounter bring a reckoning, or would it splinter her resolve and push her further into the shadows? Anne's heart thudded against her ribcage as her father stepped into the room. The weight of his presence shifted the air, chilling the warmth of her defiance. His features were tight and inscrutable, yet she felt the familiar surge of resistance flaring within her. "What are you doing, Anne?" he asked, voice steady, yet laced with an underlying tension that sent an instinctual warning through her. She instinctively straightened, her defiance a fragile wall against the weight of years of expectations. "I'm writing music. It's important to me." The words, while simple, seemed to hang in the air heavily, pitted against the history of their shared silence. "Music? You think that's all there is to life?" He scoffed, dismissing her aspirations with that singular haughty inflection that had
too often silenced her earlier. Each syllable felt like a stone dropped into a well of doubt. She forced her spine to remain unyielding. "It's more than music, Dad. It's sharing stories, important stories," she replied, her voice gaining an unexpected strength as she recalled those voices she had collected, the lives she had glimpsed through tender confessions. He stepped further into her space, eyebrows knitting together. "What stories? Do you think they will mean anything outside of what you've been given? You don't know what real struggle looks like." With those words, he launched her back to the shadows of their family expectations, questioning everything she had begun to build. That plummet threatened to unravel her. His voice dripped with condescension, undermining months of her personal growth. "What can you really understand about life beyond these walls?" It struck a chord of rage deep within her. This was the man who had trapped her in a gilded cage, and yet here he was, questioning the very essence of her awakening. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I understand more than you think. When I play, I'm not just playing for myself. I embody voices that have been silenced. It matters to them. It matters to me." A flicker of something shifted in his gaze, but he quickly masked it, face returning to sternness. The confrontation fueled her urgency, burning the limits he had imposed on her. "Is this what you seek? To waste your talent echoing the voices of those less fortunate?" "It's not a waste," Anne countered, her voice faltering for a moment before finding its steadiness again. "It's about connecting and rewriting the narrative." The air crackled with tension, and for a moment that felt interminable, they were caught in a battle of wills, both unwilling to yield. Uncertainty clawed at the edge of her thoughts. Was this the reckoning she had been dreading, or was it the pivotal moment to claim her voice? "If you think being a voice for those people will make you worthy, you're mistaken," he finally said, turning on his heel, the finality hanging like a heavy toll in the air. Her heart raced with complicated feelings, frustration, hurt, but most importantly, the undeniable flicker of empowerment. He was right about one thing: she had never felt more ready to embrace her path. He would never understand the power of those stories, the sacredness of the untold. Shaken but resolved, Anne resumed her place at the piano. The guilt, the fear, the shadows, things she had long fought against, now transformed into fuel for her fire. She began to compose again, weaving melodies into an intricate tapestry infused with all the raw emotion brimming within her.
With each note, she felt the boundaries of her identity shift, coalesce into a force she had long underestimated. Anne was more than her father's daughter. She was a force in her own right, carved from struggles, both external and internal. But as she delved deeper into her work, the door creaked open once more. Mabel poked her head inside, eyes wide with concern. "Everything okay?" "Not really." Anne's emotions spilled over like a cracked dam. "But I think I may have finally found my voice." Mabel's expression warmed. "Then let's harness it. Remember your stories. You'll need them." Will Anne confront the expectations that bind her, or will she be swept away by the family ties she's been trying to break? Would her voice resonate beyond the walls that have contained her, or would it echo hollowly back, lost in the shadows? The next performance awaited, a crucible of consequence that would determine the course of her identity. Anne sat at the piano, the soft glow of the lamp illuminating the sheets of music scattered around her like lost thoughts waiting to be transformed. She felt a rush of adrenaline pumping through her veins as her fingers danced over the keys, tentatively at first, but then with growing confidence. The weight of her father's words still echoed in her mind, but they no longer suffocated her aspirations. They fueled her desire to prove herself, not to him, but to the world. The melody that began to emerge was both haunting and hopeful, a reflection of her internal struggles interwoven with the stories she so cherished. With each note, she felt the empowerment seep into her bones, pushing her further away from her father's expectations and closer to her own truth. She closed her eyes, allowing each story she had collected, the whispered fears and dreams of strangers, the burdens they carried, to manifest through her music. Mabel returned, gently closing the door behind her. "You're really getting into it, huh?" she said, her voice soft with encouragement. "Yes," Anne responded, breathless from the intensity of her creation. "It's like I'm finally understanding how to convey what I've felt all this time. But it's scary, too. What if it's not good enough? Let that fear push you, not paralyze you. Remember, art isn't about perfection. It's about honesty," Mabel replied, her presence a soothing balm to Anne's rising panic. Honesty. The word lingered in the air, resonating with Anne's newfound clarity. It dawned on her that her father's doubts had projected a larger narrative that she had been unknowingly participating in, a narrative that minimized her experiences. But now, with Mabel's encouragement, she saw the need to confront not only her father's expectations, but her own self-doubt as well. As if in answer, she began to write lyrics for the melody swirling around her. The words flowed, raw and primal, each line an assertion of her identity. "I am more than what you see. I carry stories deep inside, a truth that needs to be freed." Writing felt like peeling back layers of an onion, exposing the core of her being one painful piece at a time. Mabel leaned closer, curiosity brightening her eyes. "What are you working on?" It's a song, about finding my voice, about confronting the expectations I've been living under." Anne looked up, searching Mabel's face for approval. "I want it to resonate, to connect, to matter." "It will," Mabel assured her, gently placing her hand on Anne's shoulder. "It's powerful. Just continue to be true to yourself." Anne bit her lip, a mix of excitement and apprehension flooding her. Was she truly ready to share such intimate pieces of herself? And what would it mean, facing her father again, knowing she was turning her back on not just his expectations, but on the path he had envisioned for her? Her gaze drifted to her reflection in the window, the image of a woman ready to break away from the shadows. In that moment, Anne realized that this was her moment of truth, one that could either solidify her identity or force her back into an old mold. Suddenly, a jarring thought clawed through her clarity. What if her song reached her father's ears? What if it laid bare her defiance in a way he couldn't ignore, forcing him to confront his own beliefs?
The tension of anticipation surged in her chest. What if her next performance was not just artistic, but a confrontation of everything she had repressed? Resolute, Anne swept her fingers back across the piano keys, the notes spinning into a late-night reverie. It was time to build the bridge between her past and her future. As the final chords of her masterpiece lingered in the air, she knew there was no turning back. "Tomorrow," she said aloud, determination etched in her voice. "Tomorrow I'll share it with him." But a shiver ran down her spine, an unsettling thought. Would she have the power to withstand whatever his reaction might be? As she stared at the empty music sheets before her, a challenge intermingled with the warmth of her resolve. There would be no peace until she confronted not just her father, but the fears that had lingered far too long. The night deepened outside her window, but inside, Anne found herself on the brink of the uncharted, ready to face whatever might come next. Would her voice, at long last, be strong enough to rewrite her own story? As the dawn crept through the curtains, the golden light filtered gently into the room, casting a warm glow over the mess of sheet music strewn about Anne's piano. She inhaled deeply, buoyed by a determined calm that had settled in the depths of her stomach. Yesterday's adrenaline had given way to a contemplative stillness, as if the universe conspired to lend her the courage she needed for today. Her heart raced with the thought of sharing her song, but a familiar sense of doubt crept in, clawing at her resolve. She pushed it aside. Today was not just another day. It was the day she would confront her truth. With every step towards her father's study, she felt a palpable tension, as if the air thickened with her unsaid words. She grappled with the idea of not just revealing her music, but offering a piece of her soul, a confrontation so profound it could reshape their relationship. But what if he dismissed her efforts? The fear was as tangible as the sunbeams warming her skin. It had so often felt easier to retreat into silence, to become the dutiful daughter standing in the shadow of his expectations. Yet, as anxiety fluttered in her chest, she reminded herself of Mabel's words. Art was not about perfection, it was about honesty. With this mantra reverberating in her mind, she steeled herself as she approached the door. Opening it, she was met with the sight of her father hunched over a stack of papers, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked up, his expression shifting from surprise to something unreadable. "What is it, Anne?" he asked, his tone a mix of curiosity and annoyance. "Dad, I need to show you something," she stammered, her heart thrumming fiercely against her ribs as she moved to the piano. Cradling her emotions like fragile glass, she reveled in the sense of control she felt, each footfall a powerful tread towards her independence. He raised an eyebrow, skepticism etched across his features. "This better not be another one of your distractions." Anne took a deep breath, fingers poised above the keys, and held his gaze. "This is important. It's my voice, my truth." With that, she began to play, weaving the melody that had poured from her heart the previous night. The haunting notes filled the air, each chord resonating with the weight of her unexpressed feelings, the fears, the dreams she had stifled for so long. As she poured her heart into the song, she could feel the release that accompanied each note, a liberating wave washing over her. When she reached the lyrics, her voice came out softer than she intended, but grew stronger with each line. "I am more than what you see. I carry stories deep inside, a truth that needs to be freed." The vulnerability of her words felt like an open wound exposed to the air, unguarded yet invigorating. She could see the shift in her father's expression, a flicker of confusion, then something else, a hint of recognition or perhaps understanding. Was it possible that he might see her now, truly see her? As the final chord faded into silence, a deafening calm settled in the room. Anne's breath came quick, the stillness stretching infinitely, suffused with the weight of her revelation. They both waited,
She for his reaction, and he, she sensed, grappling with emotions long buried beneath expectations. "I don't understand," he finally said, the words barely above a whisper. "Why now? Why this?" Anne clenched her fists, her bile of anxiety mingling with a new courage. "Because I've been hiding, trying to fit into a mold you created. But I'm not that person anymore. I am more than your visions for me." His face paled, caught between anger and disbelief. "You think singing some song will change anything? You
Can't just rewrite your life." Anne felt a swell of defiance surge within her. "That's exactly what I'm trying to do. I deserve to be heard, to find my path, even if it doesn't align with yours." A charged silence enveloped them. The stakes had escalated, and Anne suddenly felt the urgency of the moment pressing down. Would he accept her transformation or fight against it? "I won't let you," he began, but she could see in his eyes the flicker of doubt. Somewhere within him, did he understand the implications of her defiance? The potential for both fracture and repair in their relationship loomed prominently. "Tomorrow I'll perform this publicly," she interjected, her voice steady. "It's time for everyone, including you, to hear my voice." As she left the room, Anne felt an unfamiliar strength coursing through her, both invigorating and terrifying. The divide between who she was and who she wanted to be began to blur, creating space for transformation. Yet, with the thrill of her defiance came the shadow of uncertainty. What would happen when she faced the world outside their house, and how could she navigate the potential ripple effects in her father's heart? As the realization of her bold step settled within, she recognized that the true confrontation was only just beginning. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but today she stood at the precipice of her voice, and, in doing so, her life. How would she balance her newfound strength with the consequences that lurked ahead? The night before her public performance felt endless, a cascade of emotions swirling in the quiet of Anne Baxter's room. Her heart raced with anticipation, yet shadows of doubt loomed larger than ever. She had bared her soul to her father and now stood on the edge of a new identity. Being the daughter of a billionaire had always come with its weighty expectations, but Anne had decided to challenge that legacy, not just for herself, but for the voices she had chosen to echo through her music. As dawn broke, a lightness permeated the air, as if the universe was affirming her decision to reclaim her narrative. With every fleeting moment, she felt certainty grow. She was ready to share her song that wove together the lives she had encountered, infusing empathy into the backdrop of her own evolution. Despite the nagging anxiety about her father's reaction, she anchored herself in Mabel's words. "Art isn't about perfection, it's about honesty." They resonated deeply as she dressed, transforming herself into the vibrant artist she had become. This was her stage, her moment, and there was no turning back. Arriving at the venue, the atmosphere buzzed with energy. Friends, family, and community members mingled, and yet Anne felt a nervous rock in her stomach. The spotlight would reveal not just her voice, but her truth. As she walked backstage, she caught a glimpse of the crowd, a sea of supportive, smiling faces. Mabel stood among them, giving her an encouraging nod. "Remember," Mabel whispered before she stepped on stage, "this is your declaration. Own it." With a deep breath, Anne took her place beneath the spotlight. She felt the warm glow wrap around her as the crowd hushed. The anticipation was electric, as if everyone was leaning forward, willing her to make her mark. When she began to play the opening notes of her song, the weight of her father's skepticism hung in the air, but she pushed it aside, focusing instead on the family stories that shaped her journey. As she sang the first verse, Anne could hear the gasps from the audience, and with each line she poured more of herself into the performance. The moments of vulnerability from her encounters, the shared experiences of her community, all hinged on this moment. The lyrics encapsulated the struggle and triumph that came with aspiring to be more than a title. I am more than what you see. I carry stories deep inside, a truth that needs to be freed. The echoes of her voice wrapped around the crowd, creating a tapestry of connection. For the first time, Anne felt the power of community validate her journey. She was among friends, not just shadows of her lineage. The applause crescendoed, vibrating through her spirit, filling the empty spaces left by doubt. As she reached the final notes, she felt a change sweep through the audience, a spark of recognition. She wasn't just singing about her own liberation, she was championing the stories of those once silenced. The applause erupted, enveloping her in warmth, and she almost forgot that her father was watching. Caught in the rush of the moment, Anne searched the crowd for him, her heart pounding. In that instant, she saw her father's face. His brow was furrowed, but there was something else. Recognition? Confusion? She couldn't parse it out, but what mattered was this. She was no longer content in the confines of expectation. She had stretched herself into something formidable. Feeling buoyed by the applause, Anne stepped off the stage with an exhilaration that felt new yet familiar. Mabel was waiting for her, pride shining bright in her eyes. "You did it, Anne! You truly did it!" "Thank you," Anne breathed, a smile breaking across her face. But the lingering question of her father's response pierced through the joy. Moments later, she spotted him moving toward her, the crowd parting. "That was interesting," he said, his tone neutral but his gaze studying her intently. "Interesting?" Anne echoed, a surge of defiance coursing through her. "It was who I am. I meant every word." "I see that," he said, his eyes softening. "But this is a complicated path you're forging ahead of you. You really think it's viable?" "Dad," she implored, her voice steady and resolute, "this is not just a path. It's my life. It's my voice, allowing others to be heard." He hesitated, the tension hanging between them like the silence before a symphony. "I'm still trying to understand and adjust." "But," he paused, an unexpected tremor of sincerity, "you've proven today you're capable of something truly remarkable." Those words hung in the air, a hesitant acknowledgement of her transformation. The conversation that followed promised to bridge the gap created by differences, and the tension began to unravel. Anne recognized in that moment that acceptance would come with time. But what mattered was that she had begun to carve her place within her family, one built on authenticity rather than expectation. Stepping outside after the performance, Anne breathed in the cool night air, feeling liberated. She was no longer just the billionaire's daughter. The artist within had truly awakened. With a renewed sense of purpose, she promised to amplify her voice, not just as an artist, but as a connector of stories. This was just the beginning. Anne Baxter was ready to embrace her identity and the journey ahead. Now is the moment for you to take action. You need to subscribe now and don't miss the next exclusive emotional stories that will inspire even more. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and help spread these messages. Comment below your reactions and any theories you have about Anne's journey. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this incredible story of personal transformation. Only true fans of personal overcoming stories understand the importance of supporting the channel through these actions.